Welcome to the Music and Arts Centre, and particularly to the Foundation Memorial Lecture for 2025. When we knew that the auditorium would be open for this reunion, we felt that it was appropriate to try and find an old grey in the performing arts arena to be our memorial speaker for today. I must say, there were a number of options, but to think that we could find the most acclaimed old grey in the performing arts arena is certainly an absolute pleasure and privilege to have Adrian Kohler with us here today. I'm not going to go through his CV in too much detail, but I strongly recommend that you do have a read of that. It is certainly enlightening and uplifting. I first became aware of Adrian when I saw the production of The War Horse. I must say I was completely gobsmacked and blown away. But if I'd known he was a grey boy, I shouldn't have been surprised. It was just simply remarkable. And if you don't want to believe me, go and see the show and join the other in excess of 8 million people around the world that have seen that show. It has become the National Royal Theatre in London's most successful production in history, and at certain times there have been more than 5 of those shows running at any one time. So it really is a breathtaking and remarkable show. So Adrian's lists of accomplishments, recognitions, I say, are very long and prestigious. And for me, I think one knows that you've made it when people start writing plays about your life. So I'm delighted to have Adrian with us today and really looking forward to hearing what he has to share with us. Thanks very much for joining us, Adrian.
Andrew, thank you very much for those kind words. It is indeed an honor for me to be here. 2 nights ago, my husband Basil and I were sitting up there in Q Row to watch the opening concert in this venue, and it was both astonishing to see the levels of accomplishment that the musicians had made in the years here at Grey, a huge testament to the music department, but also thank you. But also the shift in policy really towards the arts since our day here. Artists who find impelled to be an artist will have a lot more encouragement these days than back in the 60s. My talk today is From the Mountains to the City, a puppet search for the center, and it's about the periphery and the center, and which is important. I'd like you to imagine a circle of mountains, impenetrable, hard to get over. They encircle a plain, and in the center of the plain is a beautiful city. There are libraries, theaters, universities, schools, orchestras. In fact, they think quite a lot of themselves. Outside of that circle of mountains is the domain of the puppeteer. The puppeteer travels peripatetically, eking out a living in wherever they can find an audience, practicing a lowly art form, a lowly form of the theatre. But the puppeteer has heard about the city in the center of the plain, only he doesn't know how to get there. The mountain pass is not visible. So that's the start of the center and the periphery. My story starts in Red House, where my father Harold had a wonderful workshop where he loved to make furniture and boats full of wood and tools, and my mother was an art teacher with an extraordinary passion for puppets. Harold built Thelma a marionette theatre in the garage in the backyard. And I guess she must have been very happy. She taught puppets to, I think there's one of her students here, and taught puppetry for 2 years before her own family started to arrive, and she had no more time for that. But the puppet theatre was still there. As children, we spent huge amounts of time in it, and by the time I was 10, I made my first jointed wooden marionette, a parrot. And the parrot became the first member of a large cast of puppets, which eventually ended up being the story of Dr. Dolittle. 40 jointed marionettes, 9 complete scene changes, and the willing voices of those thespians in Red House to have their voices recorded. I have the Doctor.
I have only one wish. I'd love to be much bigger.
While I was at Grey, every weekend and every school holidays I spent making puppets in my dad's garage. And so by the time Dr. Dolittle was put on the boards in the village in the garage in our house, I knew how to make puppet joints. I had started on my 10,000 hours as a craftsman. Dr. Dolittle ran for 9 performances, and then it was put away forever. We never did it again. I went to Cape Town to study art. Wait a bit, I do have a photograph of my sister. It's the only photograph we have actually of Dr. Dolittle in that garage puppet theatre. I studied fine art at the Michaelis School of Fine Arts, trying hard to forget about puppets. I met Basil Jones. 2 months later we realized we'd fallen in love. We kept it a secret, but soon it was out. We both enjoyed our time at Michaelis very, very much, except that my teachers always said, Adrian, the answers to the puppet projects always look a bit like puppets. And here is one of them. It's a sort of a cross between a bride and a minimalist sculpture, and it can move. Not many sculptures moved in those days. After art school, because the puppets were still burning in my brain, I joined the Space Theatre, South Africa's first non-racial theatre, started by Ethel Fugard. I joined it because, apart from being the most exciting space in town where they pitted themselves up against the censor board as often as possible, they had a puppet company there. And for many years I worked in the theatre, gaining a lot of theatre experience. But by the end of the 70s, the South African Defence Force was calling once again, and Basil and I chose voluntary exile in Botswana. We both got jobs. Mine was in the Department of Adult Education, where I was responsible at the university. I was responsible for popular theatre program, running workshops in remote villages. You must imagine Botswana then, it still is a country the size of France, but it only had 1 million people in it. So they were very spread out, and some of the villages away from the main railway line were still in the traditional way of living. It was an incredible experience for a person growing up white in South Africa to have access to such a tremendous way of life and a tremendous country. In this picture, a performance is happening about some local issue. Behind it is a banner, and in the window of the banner is a puppet. And we used puppets as ways of commenting on the action, of introducing new characters in the story, but also to make jokes. I had a 3-year contract, and by the end of that, I was starting to have new plans. In the popular theatre workshops, I always ended up watching, and because we moved 1 week in one village, another week in the next, the level of puppetry never got beyond a certain point. And I was very keen to try and push my passion for the puppet a bit further. My only problem was that Basil did not love puppets. He was intending to be a fine artist. He did very well at Michaelis. But as luck would have it, I went to Joburg to buy some equipment for the office in Gaborone, and I passed an art shop, and in the window was this figure. It looked like a puppet to me, but I had no idea that there was anything like a puppetry tradition in Africa. It was an African art shop. I went in, looked under the dress, found that it had rods that operated its arms. When I moved them, these two arms moved in a beautifully elegant fashion. It cost too much money, but I bought it and took it to Gaborone, unwrapped it on the dining room table, and I saw Basil's light go on in his head. He realized that puppets didn't have to be the Muppets, didn't have to be Punch and Judy. It could be sculptural, it could be serious, it could tackle adult topics. The Malian tradition we discovered was thousands of years old. There were some puppet forms that existed there that didn't exist anywhere else. The incredible sculpture tradition they had was incorporated into it. So at the end of our contracts, we headed home and started Handspring Puppet Company. I think our parents were a little alarmed, but we were on the periphery. We needed a truck to go around to those remote villages, and so we pooled our savings with 2 art school friends and bought a truck, fitted out in Uitenhage, and built 4 bunks in it and a little lounge. Here's me and one of the puppeteers in the lounge. It had a kitchen, a little stove, and a fridge that never worked. And we stayed in caravan parks for 5 years. This is a baboon puppet from one of the early shows, but as we were rehearsing our first one, a friend from the Space Theatre came in the door, an actor, Bill Curry, and he said, "You're rehearsing a play, but you don't have a director." He'd studied London. He was the first black guy to study London at the posh drama school in London. And he said, "You don't have a director." So we said, "Well, we can't afford one. We're just 4 of us, and we have to do everything." He said, "Well, you can't make a play without a director. An outside eye is vital." And so he volunteered to be our director. He said, "I'm out of work at the moment." Actors call that being on holiday when they don't have a job. And for the next 5 years, he directed all of our children's theatre. We made 1 a year, and he taught us basically, us art students, how to act. But at the end of those 5 years, in 1985, those of us who are old enough will remember P.W. Botha declared a state of emergency. And this was a brick wall for us. We had been earning our living traveling to schools by then, and now suddenly we were banned from going into schools. We were too much of a security risk. Wasn't quite sure, if they thought we had guns under the bunks or something. But anyway, we had to think of another plan. And in Botswana, in those days, there was a bookshop which housed all of the books that you couldn't buy in South Africa. I found a play which I felt could be adapted to puppets. It was about 2 episodes of An Easter Rising by David Lytton, C. Louis Leipold's nephew. It's about 2 white women living on a remote farm in Mpumalanga, and a policeman visits them one day. This is an early sketch for the puppets, and he's carrying a box of pigeons, 2 pigeons, and he says, there's been a shootout in the district, and there's a wounded activist who's roaming around the country. Because these women don't have a telephone, he says, if he comes to your farm, just secretly open this box. These pigeons will fly home, and they'll tell us that he's there. unbeknownst to him, they're looking after his wounds in a bedroom in the house. And so the play continues. This production of episodes of An Easter Rising actually resulted in being the vehicle through which we passed through the mountains towards the city. Initially in the suburbs, shall we say, but doors started to open. The Market Theatre were interested in our work. Easter Rising played at the Grahamstown Festival to Capacity House. People bought tickets even though they couldn't see the show. They sat in the passage and listened. It was our first real moment of exhilaration, and our first, ultimately, show that we took overseas to a festival in France, where initially, as South Africans, we were totally persona non grata in 1985, until they actually saw the play. And then they were very worried that we couldn't go back home again. We met William Kentridge. For those of you who know art, William is South Africa's most prolific and famous international artist now. But he was just starting out with his animated charcoal films. It took forever to make, and so he felt that perhaps puppets could play the foreground and he could animate the background of the theatre. So our first play was Wojciech on the Highveld. Here is a scene where Wojciech's wife is totally enamored by this sexy miner who's doing his dance with the spades. There you see the screen that is moving as this play progresses. The screen could change scenes in an instant. It made the show run so much quicker. Here's Ubu and the Truth Commission. By the time the Truth Commission was happening, we decided to make a piece about it. Here is Ubu, who is the Special Branch operative, hiding documents in his wife's crocodile handbag. From these plays, we progressed to opera, where there was still animation on the screen behind us, but we worked with singers. Initially, we were terrified of them. They felt like racehorses, and working with puppets would be a very difficult thing. They had to trust the puppet. They had to sing through the puppet, and a puppeteer would be operating it with them. Here on the is it left of your screen is a tenor called Julian Podger from England, singing the title role of Ulysses, and that other puppet is his son Telemachus. And we are still performing this show. We made it in '97, and it's still getting invitations. I played Penelope, Basil played Ulysses, as we were the puppeteers. And eventually we had to relinquish our roles when our wrists gave out. The younger generation has taken over. But we played opera houses, like the big ones in Europe. This is the one in Palermo in Sicily. And if you ever saw The Godfather Part 3, Al Pacino got shot on the steps. But at this time, Alicia Adams from the Kennedy Center Special Programming met us at a Grahamstown Festival meeting, and she said, I've got a big idea. I've presented this company from Mali at my theater in Washington, and I think it would be a great idea if you and them collaborated. We said, Alicia, you don't know what you're saying. We have been admirers of this tradition for so long, but in the beginning, South African passports could not get you to Mali. So she took us to Mali. We traveled around, we met Yaya Koulibaly, and he is the 7th generation of a family puppet troupe, 7th generation chef, and together we made Tall Horse about a giraffe. It was a true story about a giraffe that was given from the Pasha of Egypt to the King of France as a political bribe to stop him interfering in the liberation of Greece. And it was noted by the National Theatre in London. We don't know how they heard about it, but they came out to see the show at the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town. Very polite, as Brits are, and they went back, and 3 months later we got a phone call. Michael Morpurgo has written this book about a war horse, with a boy who falls in love with a horse, and the horse goes to the war. And even before he'd finished telling me the story, I knew we had to do it. It had to have a puppet in the center, and the Royal National Theatre is the center of the center. when we read the book, finally it arrived in the post, we had to deal with problems like cavalry charges of 150 horses, ploughing in the fields of Devon. Would our puppets be able to do that? After a lot of workshopping, they started to take the right form, basically made of cane as like baskets, with emotional indicators like twitching head, twitching ears and tails. Here is Basil training a puppeteer in London to sit in the middle of the two puppeteers underneath. If you sit too close to the front, he'll collapse. If you sit too close to the back, he'll collapse. The weight has to be completely even. And please don't wobble sideways. Here is rehearsal footage of the play just before it was opening in London, in the huge rehearsal room. These are swallows swooping about the stage. The Olivia stage is a vast amphitheatre with lots of air above it. So to occupy the air, we made these tall, long rods, fishing rods, with swallows on the end to say, it's springtime in Devon. You must imagine there's nobody in the scene. There's just a little foal waiting to take his first steps on a beautiful green field with birds tweeting in the background. The thing about this puppet is that its legs are not attached to the body. They're just held there by the puppeteers for a very special reason you'll see later. But they're just rocking their wrists to make the chest go up and down to allow it to breathe. It's a compilation of several rehearsals in one. You see they do a costume change now. Although there's a crowd of puppeteers around it, with the right lighting and the right costumes, we of course hope they disappear. Now the horse is going to grow up. This was the big problem. How do you make one puppet grow up into a bigger one? Watch the legs. Well, that show did very well. It won the Theatre Awards in London, transferred to the West End, and then eventually to Broadway. There was a touring production that went around on Broadway. Those of you who know what a Tony is, it's the Oscars of Broadway. The show was nominated for six Tonys, and we got all 6, including one special one for Handspring Puppet Company and the puppets. So we felt we were at the center. In a way, that's a dangerous place to be, because your head starts to swell. You think, it'll always be like this. It'll always be a great success. We had to start building lots more puppets. We got a factory on the other side of Muizenberg, and we in the end built 86 horses for the 9 various productions that traveled around the world. We accumulated a wonderful team of people building the puppets. When each set of puppets, each set had 9 horses plus other puppets, was finished, we set off a whole lot of firecrackers. You can see them behind the group. And because there was a tricky township nearby, it sounded like machine gun fire, and the police cars came rushing in. At about this time, we started, we got to know an arts group in a small little Karoo town of Barrydale, where a lot of youth activity was happening after school. You know, it's classic old apartheid town, whites on the one side of the mountain and blacks on the other. And we thought this is a way to bridge the two. So they were already doing an annual parade on the 16th of December, the Day of Reconciliation, and we started adding puppets to it, and this became a 7-year project. Compared to the 1 week in each week in Botswana, Basil, I nearly kicked him under the table when he suggested this, pledged 7 years. And but over the 7 years, there was a production in the school at the end of each year, and the research for each one grew and grew from the people involved. Here is the kids walking up the street with puppets they've made. Here is a story about a young man who is caught in a rainstorm, runs into a cave that's full of rock paintings that come alive, because within the township there's a big growing awareness of Khoisan heritage, and also acknowledging that your ancestors had been slaves. Here is the mantis god marrying the eland god. The mantis was a great puppet designed by one of our factory people, built on a bicycle. It could rush around this vast field at a great speed. For our 7th year, our final year, we decided to make a splash about elephants. And by this stage, our factory workers were very skilled at the sculpting of cane. The guy in the middle was our main sculptor now. Here are the finished elephants rehearsing in the backyard, in the street outside Barrydale. They've got these cloth fabric panels on them, not for any decorative reason, but because the wind blows crazily in Barrydale, and this is an outdoor performance. So when the wind blows hard, those flaps just open, and the wind blows right through the elephants, and then and they look like they've almost disappeared. And then the wind drops, and they drop down, and suddenly the elephant is back. In the lockdown 2020, all theatres closed. It was incredibly bad for the theatre industry globally. But we were fortunate that we were approached by a group that wished to highlight the plight of refugees fleeing from the civil war in Syria. These refugees go from Syria along what's called the Path of Tears, most of them ending up at this jungle, the Calais refugee camp, hoping to get across the channel into England. And so they felt if we made a puppet that would attract attention of the media, and a puppet of a little girl who's looking for her lost mother, perhaps the world might take notice. So we proposed a 3.5 meter tall puppet, also with stilts this time, operated by one person inside and 2 people working the hands. Here she is, Amal. She's already by this stage in Marseille, and there she is working with a performance that was created by undocumented children in a refugee camp in Marseille. Puppets of birds that sort of, I suppose, represented themselves flying around, made out of books. In Rome, she met the last pope, and then she started getting invitations all over the world. She crossed United States here. She's looking for a train in Grand Central Station. And finally, she walked right the length of Mexico. And as she neared the southern border of Mexico, which the country is a country that understands the plight of refugees and the turmoil that exists politically in South America, 35,000 people turned out to see her. So the question of which was the most important part, the accolades of Broadway and the West End, or the amount of people who come out to see a free show on the street. in Barrydale, we didn't necessarily train a lot of actors or musicians, although there were some. But what actually happened was the confidence that was developing in the performances with people going year after year to do the annual play at the end of the year. And with assistance from the University of the Western Cape, currently 80 young people from the township are in tertiary education. So I'd like to leave you with a question. Which one is more important? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Do you have any questions for Adrian?
Is Amal still around? Are you still using her?
Yes, Amal is still around. She is still answering questions. I mean, answering the call for her to be there. But there is a new project now, which we are not part of, but our protege company, who you saw this one sculptor making elephants. There is a group of puppeteers from a township that joined our factory 10 years ago now. They've developed into their own company, and they've been hired to, with the same company that produced Amal, to make a project called The Herds. The Herds is now, they've made wild animals of Africa that are, there are groups up Africa who've been building these puppets based on the designs designed in Cape Town by this group. They're made out of recyclable materials because the theme is climate change, and so they're made of cardboard, and they've already run through the Congo, through Lagos, through Dakar. They're on their way to Morocco, and they will go right across Spain with the invading city centers with these cardboard animals. There's elephants, giraffes, kudus, everything. They're heading for the Arctic Circle. It will end in Norway. And each time they reach a new city, there is more and more publicity, and hopefully the subject of climate change is receiving a good hearing.
Adrian?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your own Robin story. Truly is inspirational and definitely challenges where I put my energy. Just a practical question. For something like Amal that travels and walks it, what kind of maintenance and people do you need around it in order to keep it?
Cool. Yeah, that's a good question. The question, if you didn't hear it, the question is, Amal had to walk. I mean, her stage was 8,000 kilometers long, and she had to last. In fact, we made two. There's a carbon copy, so they look identical. They're low tech. The basket work of the chest. You see it's not just a design issue. It's actually because it's air conditioned. The puppeteer on the stilts, holding up more than a meter of puppet above his head on the backpack, and balancing on stilts. It's a very hot job. And when we put a costume on her, it didn't look as nice anyway, but it was far too hot. So her head is made out of carbon fiber. She's got a small bit of electronics. Her eyes do move. And she's got a little remote control on one of the head controls in the chest. So her eyes can look in any direction. And because there are two of her, in a long outing, she can walk from one city square to another, but have a little pee stop along the way, and go down an alley, and the crowds are not allowed to follow her, and then the other puppet is changed, and out she comes. So there were two teams working with her. She has fallen once, after a rain in Paris. She tread onto a slippery steel disc, and the feet just went out from under her, and she crashed. But because the puppeteer inside is strapped into what's basically a basket, the basket is flexible, and so there was no injury. In Chile, more recently, she really had a bad fall and smashed her face. And I was getting all sorts of emails about how we're going to fix it. But in Chile, they're also artists, and they patched her up and painted her, and you can't tell. So carbon fiber is a horrible material to work with. You have to wear hazmat suits because the dust gets into every pore of your skin. So we don't like using it. But she's robust. She's only had one change of boots, and she's walked much more than the initial 8,000 kilometers. She's been in Ukraine. She's been so many places. Yeah.
Adrian, will you hold it because I shake? I'm intrigued by this puppet story.
Yes.
I remember my father, who was a First World War chap, talking about the puppet shows that he used to go to.
Yes.
And typically Punch and Judy, where Judy got smacked over the head and came back and hit the other bloke and fell over, and there was a real shambles. But the intriguing part is that in my early primary school days, I went to school, a small school in Summerstrand called Summerwood.
Yeah.
And our school was an army barrack, and that was in 48, 49, around about there. And one of the hand situations we were trained to do was to make puppets.
Mm.
And I made a puppet, which was a clown. And the head was made of, I can't, plaster Paris first of all, I think.
Mm.
And then we used to put paper mache around the thing to form it, cut it in half, fill it, and then you had to sew the costume and whatever up. And that puppet, and you had a sort of a hand situation, the strings going down to the arms and whatever, and you worked this thing.
Yes.
And it seems to be that your mother, teaching my wife Anne at Red House how to make puppets, is very similar to that period of time.
Yes.
When puppets seemed to be quite a big thing.
It seemed to be an important part of child art education.
That puppet stayed in our house for years and hung up on a wall somewhere. So.
Do you want to audition?
Thank you.
My name is John Fryer, a class of 63. Our geography teacher was David Tanton.
Yes.
And his father was an architect, and my sister worked for him. He was a secretary.
Mm.
And of course, he did the Punch and Judy shows in the park regularly, and we got to know the family very well. And the care, even though they were very crude puppets, the care that went into the make of Punch and Judy and the dog and everything else like that was remarkable. And you've just brought back so many memories of what was at that time a hugely successful ability to actually discuss some of the social issues.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I came here today. Thank you.
Well, yes, the Punch and Judy tradition is venerable. It got, in a sense, degraded when it became a children's entertainment, because its most important part of its existence was when it was political satire, and it existed predominantly when Cromwell closed all of the theatres in London. The only theatre that was available to people was the Punch and Judy show. There was a question over there.
Hi, I was very privileged to be able to see one of your early shows here at PE. I think the Chameleon Story at the Little Theatre.
Wow.
I was an art student at the time, and it was to this day, it was very wonderful. And this is just some of the most extraordinary art going around in the world, I think, that's going on here.
Oh, that's amazing. You saw that show. There was a chameleon character, and of course chameleons change color, and and we didn't know how to do that. I mean, it's like you've got to change the costume and the audience can't see the costume being changed. But this puppet, a green chameleon, went behind a red flower and came out the other side red. And quite a lot of people didn't realize that we had two chameleons. But I'm so glad you saw that. I'm so glad you remember it.
Good morning, Mr. Kohler. Thank you for coming back to share some of your story with us and to tell us how your beautiful puppets have been part of it all. The only puppet I know is Pinocchio. He became a real boy because the good, strong, brave, kind heart of the puppet maker grew inside his wooden chest. It sounds like your heart beats in your art too. I guess that's why even grown-ups can learn from puppets. This is to say thank you from everyone at Gray.
Oh. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was very inspirational and how fitting to be the first keynote address in this wonderful venue, the Bergman Auditorium. Adrian, on behalf of everyone here today and the Gray Foundation, would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to you for sharing your story. It didn't take a lot of pulling of strings from Bev to get you here today, but truly, what an inspiration. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody.